Flames were already visible when the first call came in. Neighbors stepped outside to find the sky above filled with smoke from a backyard engulfed in flames. Neighbors rushed outside, hearing screams and the sound of a child crying for help. By the time emergency crews arrived, it was too late. The woman they found lying near the fence had been attacked and set on fire in her own home, a scene that detectives would later describe as one of the most gruesome sights that they had ever witnessed. Her name was Kelly Wilkinson, a 27-year-old mother of 3. Within hours, police confirmed that another person found at the property with severe burns was Kelly's estranged husband, Brian Johnston, who was already facing domestic violence-related charges at the time. What unfolded in the days that followed would expose a series of missed warnings, reports made, calls for help, and a system that had every chance to intervene, but didn't. How does a mother, already under police protection, end up murdered inside the very home meant to keep her safe? And how did every warning sign go unanswered until the moment fire filled the sky over Arendelle?
You are watching Crime Insider. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video.
By the time first responders reached the property in Arundel on 20th of April 2021, the fire had already been contained to the backyard. Paramedics moved quickly toward a woman found near the fence line while police began securing the perimeter. When first responders arrived, they found 27-year-old Kelly Wilkinson lying near a fence line. Paramedics tried to revive her, but there was nothing they could do. According to police statements later that day, evidence at the scene pointed to deliberate ignition with the intention of causing the fire, which was later following a violent struggle. Officers secured the property, cordoning off the yard and driveway. Forensic crews began photographing what remained: a scorched patch of lawn, fragments of melted plastic, and a blood trail extending toward the side gate. Detectives documented fuel containers, knives, and a camouflage backpack partially burned near the patio. Every item was tagged and sealed for analysis. A second ambulance transported a man with severe burns to Gold Coast University Hospital. Within hours, he was identified as Brian Earl Johnston, Kelly's estranged husband. Police confirmed he was under active investigation for previous domestic violence offenses and currently on bail. By mid-afternoon, the matter was formally classified as a homicide. According to ABC News, neighbors told investigators they had heard screams just before the explosion, followed by a child crying for help. Officers evacuated the remaining occupants, 3 young children, and arranged immediate care with relatives. Scenes of crime specialists remained through the evening, collecting trace samples and soil residues for accelerant testing. Detectives from the Gold Coast Criminal Investigation Branch took carriage of the case. The early working theory, based on physical evidence and witness accounts, was that an accelerant had been used. Fire investigators confirmed that burn patterns were consistent with ignition at close range. Police confirmed to media that they were interviewing multiple witnesses and reviewing nearby CCTV footage. Johnston remained under guard in hospital while forensic teams continued cataloging the site. Court documents later noted that investigators recovered security footage from the night before, showing a man resembling Johnston carrying a large bag from his vehicle. At that stage, police withheld the footage from the public pending verification. The following morning, Queensland Police Service released a brief statement. A 34-year-old male had been arrested in connection with the death of Kelly Wilkinson, and detectives were awaiting medical clearance to interview him. As the news spread across Australia, the Arundel address became a focal point for tributes and questions. Reporters described a suburban home turned into a major crime scene, its backyard covered by evidence tents. According to the Courier-Mail, investigators emphasized that domestic violence history would form a central part of their review. The case was now treated as a premeditated act of violence rather than a spontaneous incident. By the end of that first day, police had secured search warrants, seized Johnston's vehicle, and forwarded initial forensic samples to the state laboratory. The homicide investigation had officially begun. From the sealed crime scene, attention shifted to the lives behind it, who Kelly Wilkinson and Brian Johnston were, and how their relationship had reached this point. Kelly Wilkinson met Brian Johnston online in 2011. At the time, she was living on the Gold Coast with her family, working and raising a close-knit family life surrounded by her sisters. Johnston was in the United States, a former Marine who had completed several overseas deployments before leaving active service. Their messages quickly grew into daily conversations, and within a year, Kelly flew to the U.S. to meet him in person. According to ABC News reports, they married soon after and lived in Ohio for several years. Those who knew Kelly said she stayed focused on building a stable home. When the couple moved back to Australia in 2017, they settled in Arundel, Queensland, to raise their 3 children. At first, the family appeared settled. Kelly stayed home with the kids while Johnston worked in construction and trades. But over time, according to court records later cited at his sentencing, the relationship became increasingly tense and controlling. Kelly confided to friends that Johnston monitored her movements and finances. Prosecutors would later describe the relationship as abusive and controlling. Kelly herself used those words in statements that later formed part of the case file. Court documents also revealed that Johnston's behavior had worsened following his return from military service. During sentencing, the court noted references to his exposure to trauma during deployments and the impact it had on his behavior after discharge. According to ABC coverage of the sentencing hearing, Johnston had sought treatment for post-service mental health issues, but compliance was inconsistent. By 2019, family members began noticing visible strain, arguments, police call-outs, and Kelly occasionally staying with relatives. Eventually, Kelly decided to end the relationship. She moved into the Arendelle home with her children while Johnston lived separately. In late 2020, she filed for a domestic violence order, outlining a history of threats and controlling behavior. By early 2021, police records confirmed that Johnston was on bail for unrelated domestic violence and SA charges. The order barred him from approaching Kelly's home or contacting her directly. According to ABC News, there had been at least one breach before April, resulting in further police involvement. Family members later told investigators that Kelly had become increasingly cautious. She avoided being alone, coordinated school pickups with relatives, and documented every interaction with police. Despite the legal order in place, she told her sister she still didn't feel safe. Johnston, meanwhile, continued to face multiple court matters. Those close to the case later described him as unstable and unwilling to accept the separation. In the weeks before the attack, Kelly's focus was on her children and maintaining distance. She had told friends that once his legal issues were resolved, she hoped he would finally stay away. But as later court filings confirmed, Johnston's resentment escalated. By mid-April, signs of planning had already begun to appear, actions that would soon form the basis of a murder charge. What followed were clear warnings, repeated reports, coded messages, and pleas for help that revealed just how much danger Kelly knew she was in. By early 2021, Kelly Wilkinson was living under constant fear. According to ABC News, she had told her sister that the abuse had been going on for nearly a decade, long before the final separation. She said Johnston's temper could escalate over small things, and that she no longer trusted that any argument would stay verbal. Family members later described how Kelly started documenting everything. She saved text messages, kept photographs of property damage, and logged incidents with police. In one statement quoted by The Guardian, Kelly reported that Johnston had threatened to end it for both of them. Police were called on several occasions, but she felt the responses were inconsistent. Kelly's relatives recalled that she developed her own safety system, a private signal for danger. If she ever messaged them saying she was thinking about moving back to Ohio, it meant she was in trouble. According to news.com.au, she came up with that phrase because it was something only her sisters would recognize. Despite her efforts, the system around her began to fracture. ABC's reporting later showed that Kelly approached multiple police stations over several months, seeking stronger enforcement of her domestic violence order. She reported breaches, described her fear that Johnston would harm her, and asked for additional protection. The Guardian revealed that internal police notes eventually labeled her as cop shopping, a term used when a person approaches more than one station for help. That label meant that subsequent reports weren't treated with the same urgency. Officers believed she was repeating the same complaint across different branches, when in reality she was escalating her pleas because she didn't feel safe. By February 2021, The situation had reached a point of exhaustion. Kelly was still living in the same home, raising 3 children, and trying to keep her distance. She told friends she didn't know what else to do, that every time she tried to get help, the paperwork just moved around. According to The Guardian, the Queensland Police Service later acknowledged communication gaps between domestic violence units. Reports were filed, but not cross-referenced quickly enough to assess the growing risk. That delay meant no additional monitoring order or safety intervention was triggered. Kelly's sister remembered the last few weeks before her death as a time when Kelly was constantly on edge. She double-locked doors, avoided walking outside after dark, and rarely went anywhere without letting someone know her location. She also stopped answering unknown phone numbers, believing Johnston was still trying to contact her despite the protection order. Prosecutors would later confirm that Johnston had continued to breach the domestic violence orders, actions that could have led to stronger bail conditions if the breaches had been consolidated. Instead, they remained scattered across separate reports. By April, Kelly had effectively stopped expecting a response. According to The Guardian's coverage of court evidence, she told family that police don't listen until it's too late. She wasn't exaggerating. In the final week of her life, she made at least one more report, concerned that Johnston was still driving near her street. That information was logged, but not escalated. Days later, he would be seen on CCTV buying fuel and loading tools into a bag. The morning that followed would confirm every fear she had voiced, a sequence of events that began with the sound of screams and ended with a homicide classification. On the night of April 19, 2021, CCTV cameras near Arundel captured a man walking toward a parked vehicle with a camouflage bag. According to The Guardian, that man was later confirmed to be Brian Earl Johnston. Inside the bag, police later said, were weapons, tape, rope, zip ties, and a small jerry can of petrol. Investigators would later describe that footage as the clearest evidence of premeditation in the case. By sunrise the next morning, Kelly Wilkinson was at home with her 3 children. Around 6:30 a.m., neighbors heard raised voices, a loud bang, and screams. Moments later, smoke rose from the backyard and emergency calls began. When firefighters reached the property, they found Kelly near the rear fence with severe burns and multiple stab wounds. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but she was declared dead at the scene. Within minutes of the attack, Johnston suffered burns across his body. According to news.com.au, he jumped into a swimming pool on the property in an attempt to put out the flames. When officers arrived, they found him semi-conscious, with melted fabric fused to his skin. He was arrested on site and taken under guard to Gold Coast University Hospital. Detectives from the Gold Coast Criminal Investigation Branch secured the home as a major crime scene. Every surface was photographed and marked, a jerry can near the door, a partially melted rope, and the burned remnants of the camouflage bag seen in CCTV. The blood trail from the living area to the yard helped investigators map the sequence of events: a struggle, pursuit, and ignition point. According to the Courier Mail, police located 2 knives inside the property and recovered the handle of a third. They also found a tomahawk-style weapon near the pool. These items were sealed and later presented in forensic exhibits. As neighbors gathered outside, detectives began reviewing the area. One clip from a nearby home showed Johnston's vehicle driving toward Kelly's house just before sunrise. Another captured him leaving his residence earlier that morning carrying what appeared to be the same camouflage bag. Queensland Fire and Emergency Services confirmed that the burn patterns indicated ignition using liquid fuel, applied at close range. ABC News reported that Johnston's burns covered more than 60% of his body. He was placed in an induced coma while homicide detectives prepared a formal arrest warrant. For Kelly's family, the news came in fragments. First through phone calls from neighbors, then from police at the hospital. Her 3 children were placed into care with relatives later that day. The Guardian later revealed that investigators found personal documents and notes inside Johnston's vehicle, some outlining financial stress and custody concerns. Prosecutors would later use those materials to establish motive. By evening, Queensland Police issued a formal statement confirming the case had been upgraded to homicide. The forensic summary listed stabbing and ignition with accelerant as the suspected method. What had started as a suspected house fire was now one of Queensland's most disturbing domestic violence homicides. Detectives prepared their first briefing for the Director of Public Prosecutions. The evidence, CCTV footage, forensic samples, witness accounts, and the suspect's own injuries formed a clear narrative of intent. With Johnston in hospital and the crime scene sealed, investigators moved from field work to prosecution, a process that would unfold across 3 years of legal proceedings. After his arrest, the investigation moved from the crime scene to the courtroom. Detectives compiled hundreds of pages of forensic reports, statements, and CCTV footage. According to ABC News, prosecutors built their case around premeditation, arguing that Johnston had gathered tools, fuel, and restraints in advance, then carried out a planned attack. For nearly 3 years, the case moved through procedural stages as Johnston underwent medical recovery and psychological assessments. He remained in custody under guard, facing charges of murder and multiple breaches of a domestic violence order. On the 14th of February 2024, Johnston appeared before the Brisbane Supreme Court and pleaded guilty to murder. News.com.au reported that the courtroom remained silent as the plea was entered. The admission removed the need for a trial, leaving only sentencing to determine the outcome. During the hearing, the Crown detailed the extent of the planning and the brutality of the act. Prosecutors said Johnston had prepared the camouflage bag the night before, knowing Kelly was at home with the children. They presented text logs, CCTV evidence, and forensic analysis of the accelerant used in the attack. The following month, on 13 March 2024, Justice Peter Callahan handed down the sentence: life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 20 years. According to ABC News reporting from inside court, the judge described the crime as a deliberate, sustained act of violence and noted that Johnston had ignored her dignity and violated her security. Court documents show Johnston received additional concurrent sentences for breaching the domestic violence order, but those did not affect the life term. Prosecutors called the case one of the clearest examples of system failure preceding a preventable homicide. As part of the same proceedings, the court heard that Johnston faced separate SA and rape charges related to earlier incidents. Those matters were committed to a later hearing in August 2024. ABC News confirmed that those charges remained on record as part of his history of offending. In September 2024, attention briefly shifted to a related prosecution involving Johnston's co-worker, Bradley Bell, who had been accused of assisting with access to materials used in the attack. Bell denied involvement. A Supreme Court jury later acquitted him after Johnston testified that Bell had no role in the planning. For Kelly's family, the sentence brought closure, but no relief. Her sister told ABC News that justice can't undo what was done. It only confirms how many warnings were missed. With the conviction finalized, the focus turned to what remained: a family rebuilding, a community demanding change, and a state preparing to confront the failures that had led to Kelly's death. Outside the Brisbane Supreme Court, Kelly Wilkinson's family stood before reporters holding her photograph. Her sister Danielle told ABC News that the sentence marked the end of one fight and the start of another. For the family, justice had been served, but accountability was only beginning. Within days of the verdict, tributes spread across Queensland. SBS Australia reported that hundreds of people gathered on the Gold Coast for a candlelight vigil. Flowers and children's drawings were left outside Kelly's former home, turning the street into a memorial. Fundraisers were launched for her 3 children, who were now living with relatives. But the public mourning soon gave way to questions. Domestic violence advocates called for stronger protection systems, saying Kelly's death exposed gaps that had been discussed for years. The Guardian wrote that her name had become a reference point for systemic failure. According to ABC News, the Queensland government ordered an internal review into police handling of domestic violence cases. That review found delays in communication between districts and inconsistent assessment of high-risk victims. The findings prompted a wave of operational reforms. By early 2025, domestic violence prevention had moved to the center of state policy. Lawmakers approved funding for new high-risk response teams and updated information-sharing platforms linking every police district. Officers were trained to treat repeated victim contact as a risk escalation, not a nuisance. Advocacy groups credited Kelly's case with forcing those changes. The reforms became known informally as the Wilkinson measures, a reference used in parliamentary debates when discussing new domestic violence protocol. For Kelly's sister, those reforms were necessary but overdue. In an interview with ABC News, she said the family's focus had shifted from grief to prevention, ensuring no other woman would have to plead for help in the same way her sister did. As 2025 continued, public attention turned from mourning to accountability. Media coverage described Kelly's case as a catalyst for cultural change inside Queensland Police Service. Community forums and domestic violence networks began sharing information on how to safely document breaches and report intimidation. By mid-year, those efforts culminated in a formal review of the state's domestic violence framework. It recommended independent oversight of police responses and a single database to flag repeat offenders across jurisdictions. Then, in September 2025, 9 News confirmed what the family had long hoped for. A coronial inquest would be held to examine how police handled Kelly's reports and why early intervention failed. For many in Queensland, that announcement represented the final step in acknowledging what went wrong. It meant the questions Kelly had been asking for years would now be answered under oath. That decision closed the chapter on the public campaign for an inquiry and opened a new one, the formal search for accountability. With the inquest now confirmed, attention shifted once again from what happened to why it was allowed to happen and what those findings might mean for the future of domestic violence reform in Australia. By late 2025, Brian Johnston was serving a life sentence in a Queensland correctional centre. His parole eligibility remained set for 2041, 2 decades away. But while the criminal case was closed, the inquiry into how the system failed Kelly Wilkinson had only just begun. The upcoming coronial inquest would examine every official contact Kelly had with police, from her first domestic violence report to the final days before her death. According to ABC News, investigators plan to review call logs, internal communications, and body-worn camera footage from multiple stations. The central question was whether existing procedures, if properly followed, could have prevented her murder. For Kelly's family, those hearings were about truth, not punishment. Her sister told The Guardian that Kelly did everything the system asked. She reported, she documented, and she kept asking for help. What the family wanted now was acknowledgement, an admission that the structure built to protect her had fallen short. At a policy level, Kelly's case had already reshaped Queensland's domestic violence framework. 9 News reported that police databases were being upgraded to automatically flag high-risk offenders across districts. Officers now received mandatory training on how to identify repeat contact from victims and treat it as a danger signal rather than a routine call. Advocates described these reforms as necessary but incomplete. They argued that true prevention relied on consistent human judgment, not just software alerts. According to The Guardian, experts warned that without cultural change inside law enforcement, technical systems alone could not guarantee safety. The state government announced that lessons from Kelly's case would form part of a permanent domestic violence response review board. That board would monitor how police and courts handle high-risk cases going forward. It was a sign that the reform effort, once reactive, had become structural. Meanwhile, annual vigils continued on the Gold Coast, each April marking the anniversary of Kelly's death. Community groups read the names of victims lost to family violence that year, ending each service with a moment of silence for Kelly and her children. Her story had evolved from tragedy to benchmark, a reminder of what happens when warning signs are missed and how accountability can create lasting change. The inquest findings, expected in 2026, would determine whether those changes were enough. But even before its conclusion, Kelly's case had already forced a shift, from treating domestic violence as an incident to understanding it as a pattern that demands intervention. A sentence was delivered, reforms were introduced, but the question still hangs over Queensland's justice system. Why it took Kelly Wilkinson's death to make the system finally listen. Kelly Wilkinson's story is more than a case. It's a reminder of what happens when warning signs go unanswered. A young mother did everything she was told to do and still wasn't protected. If you believe her story deserves to be heard, share this video to help keep her name alive. You are watching Crime Insider. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. And before you go, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and whether you think justice was truly served in Kelly Wilkinson's case.